sector.
Well, I'm sure we're going to come back to Vivek, but I want to bring in Phil, who's been visionary in bringing Alzheimer's into the Salesforce community. Phil, there's a lot of non-for-profits in the audience here. You want to share some of your experiences and how you came about Salesforce and what you're doing with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, we started off very much as a tactical solution. We had a few applications around the organisation, which were basically spreadsheets. And we had a requirement to centralise those and allow nationwide coverage from our 300 plus sites to that data. And we were looking for a tactical database solution, preferably one with no client. And we looked around the market in 2008, I think, which was around the time Force.com was actually launched, and decided that Force.com was a good mix and went into that as a tactical measure. When I say tactical, we put some big things on there. We put our whole new business process where we're working with local authorities and NHS organisations to win contracts. Put that on Force.com, one of the first projects we did. About a year or two later, we did a very specific client records project for our new service where we'd receive money for the government with not much advance notice, that we had to set up a whole new service type, employ about 100 people across the UK. And Salesforce was our version 1 of client records tracking as a result of that funding. Where we are now is rolling out Salesforce for all of our client record tracking across the UK. Be about 2,000 users, tracking hopefully around 100,000 people we're aiding. Initially on-premise with no sort of social media or mobile side of things, but very much looking for social media and the mobile to come probably next calendar year after we've done the major release 1 of the work we're doing at the moment.
I didn't realise you actually sell professional services, right, as well? Do you have a professional service?
We do. We have a trading arm, and part of that trading arm sells training to local authorities or banks or anyone who wants training in dementia care or dementia knowledge. And that particular department, which is only about 20 people, are using the sales version of Salesforce as of 2 months ago.
Right.
And we're about to launch our first customer chatter group aimed at that franchise trainer group. Hopefully next week, once we get a legal disclaimer thing signed we need to give them before they use Chatter.
And did you have the CEO support for this, or how did you engage from the top and get that whole commitment to drive this through the organisation?
Quite lucky that the CEO doesn't really get involved in picking vendors, so I have a fairly free hand on that. As long as the business case and the budget stack up, we're fairly free to go. A big plus was the web browser only. When you've got a lot of old PCs, we're not an organisation that uses advanced software distribution technology. We've got ADSL links. For us, a browser-only install was an absolutely critical part of it.
Right.
And the ease of use, the Amazon comment, and I remember Mark standing on stage at Cloudforce probably 2 or 3 years ago, making a comment around Facebook has 500 million users and not one of them's done a training course.
Yep.
That struck a lot of chords for us, particularly in the not-for-profit sector where IT skills often aren't great. If you can use Facebook without a training course, I want you to use my applications without a training course.
Great. Can I turn it around to somebody? Is there any burning questions in the audience that I can entice out of you? Sir, in the front. Have we got some mics here? I think we've got a mic coming down to the gentleman in the front, please.
Hi, it's a question for James. What was your process in getting to using Salesforce, and how long did that take you? Was it a natural outcome of doing research and looking at the different solutions available? And was that driven by the CEO, or was that driven by you, or was it sort of a team effort? How did you get to the final solution?
That's a really good question, because what happened was I was working with Salesforce at the Cabinet Office and then got this role, and they were already in discussions at Windsor and Maidenhead. But what was really interesting about it was that it was the business that brought it in, and they didn't involve IT in it at all. And then I got IT, so I had the business and IT, as it were, underneath me. One part of me had brought it in without telling IT, and I was responsible for IT as well. So there was quite a lot of unhappiness, which was one of the other issues, actually, we had with bringing it in. So it was business-driven. But what I would say is that where we caught up and where we started to get in the real big benefit from it was getting the architecture planned around it properly, so that on the surface it looked like we were rolling this thing out that you could do quite quickly and it's up and running and a little bit of training and you're off. But behind the scenes, we did some really detailed architecture on the next 3 years, and basically we took each of our applications, categorised them into functions, not business areas, so case management, document management, etc., and then decided which as a service bucket that was going to go in. So whether it was platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, or software as a service, or eventually desktop as a service. So I kind of had to bring the two things together, really. The business was just getting frustrated with the speed it took to, the usual stuff, but actually you had to get IT involved because of things like identity management, and someone brought another product in just before I left, a business person. As far as I know, I've still got an account live for it because there's none of the usual processes that you do still have to do a little bit around that application. So does that answer that question?
So you were an advocate when you came into
I was, but it was kind of coincidental that they were... I didn't go to Windrush because they were doing Salesforce. I went there because they were doing lots of things interesting around technology. We had my lead member for IT was a guy called Liam Maxwell, who some of you might know, who's now Deputy CIO at the Cabinet Office. So we were the first local authority to publish all spend over £500. We did one of the first crime mapping sites. So there was a number of things going on. But we'd already started to reduce the TCO of our IT by all. I mean, I'll give you an example. Infrastructure as a service. We ran an application we built off Amazon Web Services that was going to cost us 35k to do in the normal way, and we did it for about £200 a month. Web chat, our CRM incumbent, I won't say who they were, but they quoted us 35 to 50 grand to put web chat on. We did it for £200 a month on a software as a service basis. So you're talking some pretty chunky figures quite quickly.
Can you repeat the question?
So, the question was, why aren't other local authorities following that direction? Is that... Yeah. Well, I think part of it comes... I think some of them are, again, tactically... So there's a few, like Warwickshire have gone with Google for Mail, I think. I think Hillingdon are doing some stuff on Google Apps. So there are kind of pockets of it around. I think there's a number of reasons. I think, first of all, a lot of people are locked into these big outsourcing contracts. So they might want to get off SAP or Oracle, but they're on a kind of 10, 15-year contract, so it's not so easy for them. I think some of them lack the architectural skills in-house that you need to make this journey. They can't necessarily afford those architectural skills. And I think I was lucky to have a set of politicians who were very knowledgeable about technology and about what could be done with it. So I think it's probably a number of reasons. But I should say, I read some research last week that last year, 2011, the biggest adoption of cloud in the UK was SMEs and the public sector. So I think the public sector has caught up with SMEs, and if anything, is taking over some of the large corporates in terms of cloud adoption.
Great, thanks, James. Any specific questions for Vivek or Phil? Lady at the back.
Hello, I'm Mary Hogan from the Conservation Volunteers, previously BTCV, so a non-profit. I've got a question for Phil. Do you use Salesforce in your fundraising team?
No, we don't. The primary reason for now is we, like all not-for-profits, we have quite restricted budgets of what we can do in a particular year, and at the moment our budget is pretty much entirely focused on the service delivery side of the organisation. We do have a legacy SQL Server-based fundraising package, which is one of the sort of big three. It's premature to decommission that right now. Probably in a year or two we will do a project to decommission it. There's no way I can justify getting budget to do that data migration and retraining exercise for all our fundraising data, which is quite significant in the near future. We may do some pilots before that of where we're doing local community fundraising efforts, which aren't directly tied into our central fundraising database. We may try and do some pilots of that within the next 12 months.
There's a question for Vivek here. Please.
Come in.
Thank you.
Cheers. Hi. My question for Vivek, I'm presuming it's quite similar in the US government where you'll have restrictions on your infrastructure. How do you get around and approach the challenge of housing your servers outside of the physical premises? So some of the departments I've worked with in this country, they have to have their servers within the building where their employees work. So how would you approach that?
Well, so a couple of things. I think one is recognizing that people who make that argument it's sort of an intellectually dishonest argument, right? And the reason is when you really dig deeper and you ask the question, well, so how does current IT spending work and how do current IT projects work? You realize very quickly that in the U.S. government, at least, we saw that 4,700 systems were already outsourced, right? So it wasn't really a question of is the government owning and operating every single system, but because they're already engaged in vendor relationships, so they'd already moved to that model of outsourcing. The second part of this is the question of data, right? And for some weird reason, people treat data at rest differently than data in motion. And what I mean by that is when we looked at how government was actually running, we realized very quickly that there wasn't a single U.S. government agency that was 100% domestic, right? So from the State Department to the Department of Agriculture, they had assets and operations all over the world. So inherently, the data was moving across the planet to begin with. So the second you step out and you're accessing whether it's your email or your payroll systems or any of the other systems, well, you're already, you're part of the global grid, not necessarily somehow, securing that infrastructure. And the third deep insight was that when it comes to security, there's sort of this digital arms race. And there's a false sense of security because people believe somehow if they have their arms around and they're hugging their database or their servers, they're somehow more secure. We recognize that in the public sector, we actually didn't have the security talent to compete with the best players on the planet in terms of cybersecurity. So a department like Housing and Urban Development just couldn't attract the same type of chief information security officers and security experts that some of the best technology companies on the planet could because their entire survival depended on security itself. So the way we overcame it, we actually looked at the facts on the ground, challenged the current dogma, and you also realize that a lot of it had to do with people sort of protecting what they knew, the status quo, and what they'd learned the last 20 to 30 years, when in reality, everything was already moving in that direction. And we also found out that there were, different types of CIOs, and one type of CIO was this Dr. No CIO, who would always say, no, you can't use social networks, no, you can't bring your mobile devices, no, you can't do X, Y, or Z. And very quickly we found out that those organizations were actually more insecure because you had shadow IT that was bigger than the government IT, because everybody was still using those systems. They just weren't telling the Dr. No CIO.
Just from a UK perspective as well, because I put my hand up. I was in the civil service for 8 years, and I'm about to criticise them. But I felt when I was originally on the cloud programme, why do you always start with the most bloody difficult stuff? So why do we spend hours talking about how do we get IL6 data on the cloud when most of it is up to IL2? So why don't we start with what we can do and worry about what we can't do later? And that's partly where your architecture comes in, because as long as you're saying to whoever your stakeholders are, we're coming on to that, it's not ready, there's plenty to do in the meantime. And I think the second thing I just want to say about no CIOs is what happened to me was, and I would always say this, if you have a customer service function in any of your organisations, I would make the CIO responsible for that as well as technology, because it's quite hard to say no when you're the guy getting the grief from customers coming in, on the phone or face-to-face. And I think that's a far better place for the CIO to sit than reporting into the finance director or something like that.
I can see quite a few nodding heads on the CIO knows. And also there was a session earlier on with the press when a lady called Jane Moran, who's the CIO of Reuters, stood up and talked about security inside of Thomson Reuters, saying that basically your comment about the arms race and security race, that she could not keep up with the security features that she would need to when she compares it with putting her data with Salesforce. And that's Thomson Reuters, one of the largest companies on the planet. So it's kind of an interesting comment there. So there was a question at the back here for Vivek. Yes.